You might not think of the English as a nation of great lovers, but we are. We're obsessed by gardens. Every summer, thousands of gardeners open up their gardens for us to go and look round, to admire and to criticise. You might be familiar with some of the more popular, stately gardens, but over the next hour, I'll be looking at 8 gardens that are off the beaten track, each of them unusual, beautiful, and the product of tender loving care. The heart of the Lake District, and the snows of the mountain tops are at last being pushed away by warm spring air. Tucked away on the banks of Lake Coniston is a superbly sited house that for nearly 30 years was the rural retreat of one of the greatest poets, artists and critics of the Victorian age, John Ruskin. John Ruskin was famous for his powerful and influential writings on European art, society and political economics. What was less well known was that over the years he became a passionate gardener. Ruskin had travelled extensively through Europe and came close to settling in Switzerland. In the end, though, he chose instead the mountains of the Lake District. At his new home, which he moved into in 1872, he liked to think himself back among the Italian Alps, and today his front garden still reflects this theme with a display of eye-catching alpines. From the vantage point of his turret study, his first addition to the old house, Ruskin would spend hours gazing at the changing light on the mountains and the lake. It looks now almost exactly as it did then, a rapidly changing scene to beguile and fascinate, and which he tried over and over again to capture with watercolours. With Brantwood's famous banks of rhododendron luteum in the foreground, this is a location to inspire even the most faint-hearted of gardeners. Not that Ruskin was short of ideas when he set to work on the 16 acres of land which surrounded his new home. One of Ruskin's first tasks was to build a little harbour, into which friends and visitors could be ferried in and out. It's still there. The harbour walk, which leads up from the water, is the setting for a stunning azalea avenue, which has now become one of the finest features of Brantwood and one of the most colourful displays in the Lake District. The trellis walk is part of the old kitchen garden, where cottage flowers mix with fruit and herbs. Ruskin adored simple native plants, like this, the yellow Welsh poppy. Among the poppies there are herbs like sweet cicely and sweet woodruff used in herbal pillows. By the turn of the century, many exotics were being added to the collection. This is Centaurea montana from the Pyrenees, and an even later introduction, Euphorbia griffithii fireglow. Ruskin was a keen botanist, captivated by the shape and form of leaves. He spent hours drawing the different varieties and writing pages in his notes about the brilliant simplicity and efficiency of their design. Up in the woodland behind the house is Ruskin's own carefully sited garden seat, designed so that the occupant can relish the natural beauty of the fellside scenes around. Ruskin's philosophy was that a garden, far from being formally designed and controlled, should be in total harmony with its surroundings. The gardener should aim to enhance, not to change. Wild nature tamed, he said, but not degraded under the hand of man, neither overpowering him nor overpowered, but fitting for his house.
He believed that whatever you did, be it with a building or with a landscape, you worked within the natural character of the site. And he was sort of quoted that the house and the gardens should all be of a oneness and have this sort of feeling of that the house would grow out of the gardens, and that the paths and steps and things that ran through the gardens would really feel as though they'd just grown naturally out of the rock rather than being constructed by man.
Soon, the fellside above the waters of Lake Coniston was thoughtfully transformed into a rich and beautiful wild landscape. And as always, Ruskin enriched it wherever possible with native plants. A dash of white by the stream, wild garlic, and everywhere, ferns. The Lake District is famous for them. There are over 20 species of wild fern on the estate, and under the rolling restoration plan, more are being added all the time. Ruskin laid out an extensive network of paths on the hillside behind the house, and after many years of neglect, these too are now being restored according to Ruskin's original plans. Many of them lead to glades which today once again burst into life in spring. Ruskin was a pioneering conservationist, grasping even then the damage man could do to his environment, recording the climatic impact of pollution and predicting the greenhouse effect more than 100 years ago. Happiness is increased not by the enlargement of the possessions, but of the heart, said Ruskin. I believe no manner of temperance in pleasure would be better rewarded than that of making our gardens gay only with common flowers. Ruskin's garden, overlooked by that great fell, the Old Man of Coniston, is made unique by the philosophies which shaped it, a series of landscapes which evolved from the rock and woodland glades and which were often hewn by Ruskin himself to create so many magnificent views and visions. The village of Shennington on the eastern edge of the Cotswolds. On the other side of the valley, by the village of Alkerton, 4 acres of land that couldn't be more secluded. It's the perfect setting for what's become a remarkable garden. "30 years ago, this was just another cottage, surrounded by fields of rough pasture. Since then, it's undergone an amazing transformation. Perhaps the most outstanding feature of the garden is the brilliance of its design. Cleverly framed by trees and hedges, each area has a completely different feel to it. Windows of vivid colours spring up around every corner. Maximum use has been made of the steep slope that runs down to the brook at the bottom of the valley that gives the 17th century cottage its name. A pond which in April looks grey and unsurprising has by June burst into life. Around it, a mixture of water and bog plants with a backdrop of flowering shrubs like Philadelphus bowclark and clumps of Aruncus sylvester. They mix well with irises, primulas and hostas. The garden is the creation of David and Kathleen Hodges, who decided when they moved here in the 1960s to use the natural slope not only to link the levelled areas of lawn and terrace, but to shape a series of enclosures which are the constant delight of their friends and garden visitors.
And the yellow looks nice against the Copper Beach, I think. That side we have the water which went underground by the lawn.
Later, at the bottom of the garden, they added a small lake, and from here, as intended, the view offers a complete contrast. It's almost as if you were suddenly somewhere else.
Come round the corner here.
The gently curving copper beech hedge, planted in 1972, is now imposing, tempting you to explore its folds and rewarding you with the revelation of its own secret garden within.
Seed grown, not by us, it's seed grown. And therefore we get slight variation in the colour. Hops, I think, makes it just a bit more lively.
Interesting,
This is mainly primulas and water irises and hostas.
Behind the house, there's another area again, a courtyard, crowded with hostas, campanulas and climbers. In front of the house, the white border, thronged with white willow herb, delphinium, valerian, self-seeded foxgloves and campanulas. There are also stunning colour combinations. The yellow rose Graham Thomas, complementing the deep red of the clematis Rouge Cardinal, one of 45 clematis in the garden. And a dazzling pineapple broom, Cytisus Bertandieri, which thrives on a warm wall and smells of pineapple. In April, it's the turn of the camellias, with a stonework collar to protect them from alkaline soil. Close by, a gloriously thick canopy of double white cherry blossom. Come late June, the whole of the southern end of the garden is ablaze with shrub roses, over 100 varieties, a sea of old and modern side by side, and set not in borders but informally in grass, and given plenty of room to reach their potential. Again, much thought has gone into colour combinations. Madame Isaac Perrier beside the lighter pink of the hybrid perpetual George Arends. The modern Fritz Nobis, and the amazingly vigorous Plaine de Grasse, the strongest growing rose in the garden. The roses, in a way, sum up Brook Cottage, a perfect English rose of a garden, the kind we all dream about and which looks as though it's been here forever. Kensington, in the heart of London. Among the rush hour crowds, Viv Anderson, just like every other day, is on her way to work. What's slightly unusual is that unlike most of the other commuters heading to their shops or offices in this part of London, Viv Anderson is a gardener. And what's even more unusual about the garden she tends is that it's 6 floors up. The garden in the sky, as it became known, was laid out by the landscape architect Ralph Hancock in the late 1930s above what was then a department store in Kensington High Street called Derry & Tom's. It was the largest garden of its type in Europe. Covering 1.5 acres, it's made up of 3 quite separate garden areas, the most striking of which is the Spanish garden. When it was created, the roof below had to be reinforced to bear a loading of 100 weight of soil and plant material per square foot, and specially shaped for drainage. Many plants, like Philadelphus and the bottlebrush, seem to thrive in these conditions.
There's about 1 metre of soil, and then clinker underneath that, about 1 metre again, and then asphalt between us and the 5th floor. And the whole of the garden is shaped slightly concave, so it runs to the outside walls, and it just finds its way down drains into the natural sewers. And that's just as simple as that, really.
The palm trees, with the spire of a nearby church poking up incongruously behind, quite like the relatively dry conditions, but suffer from wind damage. And these days, the borders in the Spanish garden are filled with pink geraniums. The busy lizzies that used to be here became victims of the ducks. Chief culprit was Rupert, a widgeon, who still manages to keep the London pigeons amused by his bizarre aquatic activities. The gardens look a little different now to when they first opened to the public more than 50 years ago. Then, the Art Deco rooftop building at their centre became one of the most fashionable restaurants and nightclubs in London. The Kensington roof garden survived the worst of the London Blitz, though a £250 bomb did do some damage to the Spanish garden. But later, a £1,000 bomb fell here. Fortunately, it didn't explode. Today, thanks to that lucky escape, the building is still used as a club and for banquets and conferences. Water pumped up from the mains can be found everywhere, helping to encourage the illusion that this is just like any other garden. Acanthus and yellow loosestrife thrive in the dampness. On another side of the roof, there's an English woodland glade. The gardens are truly organic, and the lack of any chemicals or fertilisers attracts some quite unusual residents. In this kind of idyllic setting, it really is very hard to remember you're over 100 feet above one of London's busiest streets. On the northwest facing side of the roof, another completely different area again. Despite the fountains, many plants find the lack of moisture make it a struggle to survive. Particularly the roses, which suffer as well from the lack of soil and the relentless heat from the building below. Perhaps most amazing about the Kensington roof gardens, given the lack of soil, is the extraordinary number of trees. A walnut, like all trees in the garden, is officially listed to protect its future. A beautiful weeping ash. And a superb pride of India. Not so much astonishing in themselves, perhaps, but, like the gardens as a whole, astonishing for simply being here at all. The Salcombe Estuary in South Devon. Hidden away in the thick woodland that covers Bolt Head, accessible only by a tiny winding road, is one of the few gardens in the country with a sufficiently sheltered microclimate to offer a really luxuriant Mediterranean feel. It could, almost, be Italy or the south of France. In the late 1920s and 30s, this was the home of an eccentric scientist called Otto Overbeck, who gradually filled the rooms of his house with hundreds of unusual historical artifacts. One of his proudest possessions was this magnificent polyphone, the precursor of the gramophone, now over 100 years old. Over the years, the house began to look more and more like a museum. Local people were invited to look around the ever-growing collections of weapons, nautical memorabilia, and natural history. Later, Overbeck was one of the first people to open his gardens to the public, charging a shilling a go and giving the proceeds to charity. The Edwardian house, given to the National Trust in 1937, is set in 6 acres, and the incredibly mild maritime climate allows all kinds of tender plants and shrubs to flourish. Unlike many West Country gardens, though, it doesn't rely on rhododendrons or camellias because the soil is alkaline. In the museum borders, dahlias thrive beside the yellow Argyranthemum. This is Impatiens tinctoria from the Basilizzi family. And this, the tender Mediterranean plant Aeonium Zwartkop. Yuccas also enjoy the hot, dry conditions. Glazed pots planted with agaves and tender perennials help complete the Mediterranean feel and pop up in every corner of the garden. Chuzan palms raised from original seed and which now seed themselves are everywhere. Its hairy trunk is used by the natives of Chuzan to make waterproof overcoats. Japanese banana trees, which bear fruit even though outdoors, were thought to have died in the bitter winter of 1986, but in fact survived. And outside in summer, too, there are even lemons. These are from Portugal and form part of the new parterre, designed in the classical manner using traditional coloured gravels surrounded by box. This is one garden where a greenhouse seems unnecessary, but there is one here, a small one, more as an insurance policy than anything else. The National Trust's head gardener here, Tony Murdoch, keeps a bank of hardy plants in reserve in case of a bad winter. There's only one formal area, the statue garden with its magnificent herbaceous borders. With the ability to grow such a range of annuals and tender perennials, this is among the most colourful selections of mixed borders you're likely to see anywhere in Britain. At its centre, the statue of a small girl called The First Flight by Albert Bruce Joy. In her hand, the girl is precariously holding a nest. There's a huge selection of red-hot pokers, Niphophia, including many less common varieties. And here, too, the devil duels with the bishop. The red Crocosmia lucifer grows right beside the dahlia, Bishop of Llandaff. So many plants here are unusually hardy. This is Datura, an angel's trumpet, which is normally grown under glass. Towering over them all, a magnificent camphor tree.
I think it's beautiful. The mix of herbaceous borders down there, the colours are fantastic. I've seen lots of English gardens, but I think this takes some beating.
The number of Mediterranean type plants and things I've seen here that I can't grow at home is just wonderful. And you know, the diversity of plants, yes.
Well, I love the hydrangeas. They're really lovely. They've got some beautiful colours. I've never seen anything like this. Really wonderful to see.
There's a profusion of hydrangeas, which thrive here as in so many parts of Devon and Cornwall. One problem is that because of the temperatures and the steepness of the slope, they dry out quickly. Not that it seems to do much damage. This example of Hydrangea sargentiana is clearly blissfully happy. Perhaps the strangest plant at Overbeck's is the huge Echium from Madeira. Self-seeding, the Echium grows in a 2-year cycle, flowering only in its 2nd year, and then dying. Common elsewhere only in the Scilly Isles, the Echium gives Overbeck's a truly fantastic feel. But then, perched up so high over one of the most beautiful estuaries in Britain, this is a truly fantastic garden. The village of Charsfield in deepest Suffolk. On the eastern edge of the village, a line of council houses. With its steep front bank awash with waves of begonias and busy lizzies, there's something about the house on the end of the line which invites a look behind its rather austere exterior. It started as a quarter-acre of neglected, overgrown land.
My goodness, it was up to our waist in grass, really was. The person who'd had it had paid the rent, but they hadn't lived in it. So it was, I think, stood empty a year. Well, it doesn't take long for a garden to get overgrown in a year.
In the years since Peggy moved here with her husband Ernie in the late 1950s, there's been a miraculous transformation. With half the plot given over to vegetables, every inch of what was left has been put to imaginative use, creating more colour and diversity here than in gardens many times its size. Peggy's divided her garden into a series of quite separate compartments, linked by paved or grassed paths, and with borders so bulging with plants and shrubs, you never know quite, precisely, where you are. In fact, it's very easy to get lost. The daughter of a local farm worker and maidservant, Peggy's now a widow, and she shares the work of the garden with her brother. She believes a garden should be much more than simply a functional place full of pretty flowers and pleasant things to eat. To her, it's much more profound.
What can you want more? This is my little piece of heaven. When I first thought about this, I thought about my rooms in my house. I didn't want a garden just square. I thought if I could divide it up into little rooms. I call it my tranquility garden, but this little area round here, it's got shrubs, flowers, and you can sit under the apple tree, you can have your thoughts with you. What more can you want? O Lord, please listen to my prayer as I sit here upon my chair. I've cut the hedge and mowed the lawn and planted seeds from early morn. And now I pray you make them grow like the picture on the packet show.
The soil is a medium loam, what Peggy calls a loving soil because it sticks to your boots.
I think one of the success of the garden is the manure, or I can say the old-fashioned word muck, aren't I? Over the years there's had so much muck dug into it, and this is how we feel we get the plants and vegetables out of it, because the idea is you must put into the soil what you want to get out. The kiss of the sun for pardon, the song of the birds for mirth. One is nearer God's heart in a garden than anywhere else on earth.
There's one passion in Peggy's life that you can't escape whichever of her garden rooms you find yourself in. Alongside the mass of geraniums, lobelia, petunias and lavatera, it's the fuchsia which takes pride of place. There are over 300 varieties of fuchsia of every shape and shade. There's no way you can miss them. They fill every available piece of ground, of wall and air. She's even had one named after her. When the weather's bad, Peggy slips into the winery, where she uses much of the produce of her own garden to make a variety of wines, most of which are immediately snapped up by the local WI and parochial church council. In all, 80 gallons of wine a year are produced here. Everything at Aikenfield is put to good use. Today, like most summer days, Peggy's expecting one or two visitors. Over the years, the fame of this little garden has spread around the county. What she wasn't expecting was an entire coachload. The money Peggy raises from these visits goes to dozens of local charities. Since she first opened her garden to the public, she's given away an astonishing £50,000. This afternoon, though, there's a problem. No sooner has one coach deposited its load than another arrives, twice the size. Suddenly, she has to cope with more than 80 visitors, each wanting to scrutinise every square inch. It's a gardener's nightmare. Not that Peggy minds, because it's so small, they're never here for long, and anyway, she says, in the end, a garden's nothing, if not shared.
The dawn of the morning for glory, the hush of the night for peace. In the garden at eve, says the story, God walks and his smile brings release.
The setting couldn't be grander. Nicknamed the house that time forgot, for 3 centuries this huge Baroque mansion was the ancestral seat of the Harper Crewe family. In 1772, the original formal gardens around the house were swept away, and well hidden by the woodland to the southeast, work began on a new walled garden. It required no less than 350,000 locally made bricks, and is today the site for one of the largest garden restoration projects ever undertaken by the National Trust. The gardens had been in decline for years, but fell into total disrepair after the Second War. Now the flower beds, which had lost all symmetry and pattern, have been recut according to the original plans, with great care being taken not to change any of the features that had been there for so long. Bedding plants like calceolaria, lobelia, geraniums, abutilon and petunias, with cordyline palms sprinkled among them, have been replanted to stunning effect. In the northwest corner of the walled garden, looking innocuous enough, is a real find. A superb example of an auricular theatre, probably dating back to the 1850s. It's been restored over the last few years by a team of professional carpenters and restocked and replanted by volunteers under the leadership of the National Trust's head gardener at Cork.
It's a really significant structure. It's the only one that we believe there is, and it's an area specially designed to house your best pot plants, particularly Primula auricula, a tiny pot-grown primula that flowers in springtime, to be followed by perhaps geraniums, as we've got here today.
Pathways in the flower garden have been realigned and resurfaced, and the borders cleared of perennial weeds. In 1990, the first herbaceous plants were reintroduced into the borders, using the mid-19th century style so favoured by the Victorian horticulturist J.C. Loudon. White clumps of phlox, for example, are spaced out along the border to help achieve a patchwork quilt effect among the Achillea and Astrantia. Other carefully sited plants add interest and colour. This is Eryngium alpinum, Turk's cap lily, and phlox. Here too is one of the biggest cucumber frames I've ever seen, a necessary addition to fill the sandwiches which would have been provided for the endless croquet parties using the newly laid lawns which replaced the old formal gardens. The cucumber frame, along with the pits and hotbeds, would have been heated by its own boiler. The vinery would have had a second boiler, and a third boiler would have warmed the glasshouse. The original stovehouse boiler, built in the 1860s, was situated behind the building and powered by coal from the then bountiful Derbyshire coalfields. But the heat was simply that given off by the flue in the back wall of the house. They needed a more efficient heating system. They developed a network of cast iron pipes through which hot water was pumped. Much better. Another traditional element of the formal garden would have been the aviary, for peacocks, or, as at Cork, for a variety of ornamental pheasants. It was all part of creating an atmosphere of harmony and tranquility, of fulfilling the image fed to the aristocracy by their designers and craftsmen of a rural utopian idyll. At the end of the day at Cork, the gardening staff would have to disappear underground. Excavated in 1816, the 200-foot gardener's tunnel allowed the Harper crews to stroll around their park without the ordeal of having to look at the working classes going home. The Garden of England. A few miles from the Kent-Sussex border, on a sheltered, steep southwest-facing slope, is a small garden that through most of the year is packed with character, charm and colour. The house, a farmhouse dating from around 1600, is set to one side, which has allowed the garden around it to be developed into an intriguing series of views and vistas that are always partially concealed to tempt and tease the visitor into exploring every corner. It's hard to believe that the whole site is no more than 2 acres. Down in front of the house, a well-designed pool, following the contour of the slope and fed by pipes leading from a small well at the rear. The colours of the orf and koi are superbly offset by the mass of roses and primulas around the water's edge. The borders and lawns at the rear are edged by a line of firs, so that the boundaries of the garden are completely obscured, again giving a feeling of great space. At the heart of the garden, a magnificent ash, over 100 years old, and the remnant of a hedge of trees that dates back to when this was nothing more than meadows and orchards. Its branches always offer a dappled shade, never a blanket one. Thriving on one of the original old apple trees, the unusual peachy cream flowers of the garland rose. And like a great necklace drawing you ever forward, the twists and curls of a path made from bricks rescued from a local brickworks. The bricks are laid on the earth, not fixed or cemented, so they drain well. The entire concept, design and construction of this beautiful garden is the work of a retired architect, Martin Furness, who took over Cobblers 25 years ago, but was only prepared to open it to the public once he'd achieved as near to perfection as possible. Today, he needs a team of enthusiastic friends and neighbours to help him. Along with his wife Barbara and another of Cobbler's star attractions, Aaron, a 4-year-old Russian wolfhound. On busy summer days, teams of local tea and cake makers are press-ganged into service.
Robert is on the gate.
Robert, I have also given him all the instructions.
Girl guides are drafted in to help with the car parking. Even the convertible seat by the gate has been specially designed and made in his own workshop by Mr. Furness himself. It's not just the wonderful garden design that people flock to see. On the predominantly clay soil, there are no less than 2,000 species and varieties of plant amassed in this small garden, many of them rare and unusual. This is Kalmia Ostbo Red, the icing sugar flower, which is normally standard pale pink. This one has scarlet buds. And a very dark purple iris. Looking rather like candy floss, an unknown species of astilbe which thrives on moisture. So does Primula vialii. This is Hebe carlteschna. And this is a native of the Mediterranean, Phlomis lanata. Over the last 20 years, there have been big strides in breeding better and more colourful hostas, and this is one of the best, gold standard. Pure gold has even more yellow on its leaves.
And they're different colours and sizes, and they're all named after princesses. This one, I think, is Princess Grace.
Apart from a little piece of lawn out at the back of the house and some roses, there was no garden here at all. No. And no water. We have a stream on our boundary over there, which we've engineered through the garden.
The perception of the garden is critical, and with an architect's eye, 7 garden seats have been placed at pivotal visual points.
Well, I've seen many lovely gardens, but this is without doubt the very best. Really is, isn't it, Peter?
I think so, and there's no question about it. It's the contours and the water element and the succession of flowers which come, and the obvious enjoyment that everyone else has in coming. I would recommend anyone to come and see this garden, I really would. I wouldn't want to miss this for anything.
All around you, glowing lawns that have been created from the original pasture by constant mowing. As so often with a garden you live in, as well as show off, it's only when all the frenetic activity has ended that you can start to really enjoy it yourself.
I like it best here just as dusk is approaching. You can go out and it is so quiet you could hear a pin drop. It's just amazing. That's my favourite time, really, for peace.
The headquarters of a large West Country County Fire Brigade.
afternoon, Somerset Fire Brigade. How may I help you?
Manned 24 hours a day, emergency calls are routed through here to mobilise fire engines at stations throughout the county. But what visitors to the main western front of the house may well be unaware of is that hidden away beneath the eye line to the south is a glorious garden that would rival any in England. Hestercombe is the supreme example of one of the most famous horticultural collaborations of the century. The architecture of Sir Edwin Lutyens and the plantsmanship of Gertrude Jekyll. Here, changes of level, water, stone and Lutyens' brilliance at playing with geometric lines and spaces blend with plants grouped carefully according to colour. The house and terrace were already here when Lutyens and Jekyll set to work in 1904. One of their priorities was to enhance the wonderful views over the Vale of Taunton to the Blackdown Hills. Another priority was to concentrate on ways of dazzling the visitor and so deflect attention from the unattractive south front of the house.
Lutyens and Jekyll were very clever as a partnership. Lutyens had this great romance with geometry, and Jekyll loved plants and a natural way of falling about the place, and they combined the two together so successfully. So you've got these pure geometric shapes softened with the natural plants.
The main central area at Hestercombe, called the Plat, was formed by digging into the existing slope and using the soil to create a flat, enclosed square to contrast with the terraces. Here, Lutyens could have a field day with his geometry, while Jekyll softened the lines of the diamond-shaped beds with Bergenia, so it's difficult to see where the architecture ends and the planting begins. The green edges provided by elephant's ears, Bergenia cordifolia, are mixed with roses and liliums. Like long, thin arms either side of the Plat, rills run down to the end of the garden, providing stereophonic sound of water from every corner. Beneath the terrace they created the grey walk, with the colours of the flowers, as so often here, brought to life by the stonework. These are sea hollies, eryngiums. Gertrude Jekyll loved using pots. This is recreated from an Italian original, and pots reappear throughout the garden. The rose garden, with a Lutyens designed bench underneath an elm arbour, was designed for a place where ladies of the house could take afternoon tea. In June, the scent of China tea roses, this is Natalie Niples, would have mixed with Madame Plantier. By this stage, Miss Jekyll was virtually blind and used a large number of scented plants. She trained as a painter and always liked to have her vistas framed like paintings. Lutyens also recognised the potential of two local stones. The soft and easily worked stone from Ham Hill near Yeovil, which he mixed with the split mort slate quarried from behind the house. This is the rotunda, a pivotal point in the garden which links the Plat with a completely different area. It's a brilliant use of space with very subdued, very Mediterranean plantings. On one side, the eye is irresistibly drawn towards the distant silhouette of the Blackdown Hills. The other leads to another terrace, and the only building Lutyens designed here, the orangery. On the southern border, a masterpiece, the 230-foot pergola, the final edge to the entire picture frame. Overhung by the climbing roses, Francis E. Leicester and American pillar, the beams create shadows which emphasise length, rather like a tunnel. It was probably an attempt by Jekyll to recreate the feeling of walking along a shaded Somerset country lane. Circular windows at either end, called clairvoyants, act as focal points, pulling your attention to the outside. Nearby, clematis laserstern and daylilies. As an example of a secret garden which is both pleasing and exciting to the eye at the same time, Hestercombe is unique. Catch it on a blazing June day, and you can begin to understand why the English country garden has become famous the world over.